Good morning, everyone. We're about a minute away. It's Sharon Avery. I can see Amanda Dale did exactly what I would suggest. If you don't fit into the poll, although Amanda, I suspect you're a caring Toronto citizen, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And for those that have just joined us, we'll get started right at 8 o'clock. But feel free to take our poll just as you arrive, just so we can get a sense of who's joined us today. Seeing lots of familiar faces. I'm so thrilled to have folks joining us over and over again. I'll give you about 30 more seconds to get online, and then we'll get started. So as we get just to about 100 people in the room, and I'm sure there are more to come because about 250 of you registered for our fourth Better Toronto Coalition gathering, I'm going to get started right away because we have a very full and important conversation today. If I'm allowed to say it, this is a conversation I have been very much looking forward to. Those of you that know me well and know Toronto Foundation, we've been very involved in the gender equality conversation in the last year and a half. And I am so thrilled to be having a conversation today, a really important conversation about the issues of COVID-19 and gender. Many of you, I'm going to actually welcome our speakers, Deepa, Heather, and Pamela, properly in a few minutes. But I do want to thank you for taking an hour out of what I think are really become very complex lives. All of us are juggling our caregiving along with our families, along with our work, many of us. And it's a challenging time. And so we use this time to come together to connect with each other. We encourage you to use the chat to talk to each other while the panelists are speaking. If something comes to you through this conversation that you think is important to ask, don't wait to ask your questions. Put them in the chat line. Our team is gathering questions for a lengthy Q&A in the second half of this conversation. And just because there are only 4 of us speaking today, I want to make sure you give voice to what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're doing, and how people can connect with you. And that is really whether you are an org leader or working on the front lines of COVID, or whether you are a funder or a donor that wants to help but doesn't know how to get involved in the best possible way. So please use the chat line and connect. I do want to, as we always do, begin by just simply acknowledging that Toronto Foundation is so grateful to work on the lands of the First Peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently Mississaugas of the Credit. I think it's really important when we do a land acknowledgement to call out the fact that the urban Indigenous population in Toronto is at minimum 70,000 Indigenous people from across this land. And before this crisis, they were dealing with high levels of unemployment and food insecurity, as well as chronic health conditions. And so they are particularly vulnerable in this COVID crisis, and a really important focus for the Toronto Foundation and in our conversations. So it makes that acknowledgement really more important than ever before. We're 4 weeks in to this gathering series, and so far we are consistently getting an enormous number of organizations and funders and donors and caring Torontonians together each week to have conversations about the most vulnerable in the COVID crisis. You'll hear me say over and over again that 66% of all donations in this country go to only 1% of the charities, and they are not the charities we are featuring in this gathering. This gathering is meant to raise the voices of the hardworking, often grassroots organizations on the front lines, working with our most vulnerable populations and really trying to encourage their voices to be heard and to be funded at this time. You know, because we have featured Van City Investment Bank on this webinar, that this webinar and this gathering is thanks to Van City. They came to us before anyone was working from home and said, we see this coming, how can we help? They have made a generous grant of $50,000, but they have also paid for and enabled this technology to be used. And I'm very grateful to them. I would like to also let you know humbly, because this isn't a fundraising gathering from, at least it's not about Toronto Foundation, but I do want you to know that the board last week approved a $500,000 initial grant to support the hardworking organizations included on this call and on all our past calls. In fact, today we will be distributing 58 undesignated grants to charities on the front lines, and that is only the beginning. That $500,000 is offered up as a match, and I'm so proud that our fund holders have responded with over $300,000 in investments as well to the Better Toronto Coalition Fund. And today I'm offering to this audience, who includes many of our fund holders, but also goes beyond it, to say that anyone who wants to be matched, who wants to double their investment in vulnerable organizations, if they do so over the weekend, we still have $190,000 available in our match. And so I will only call that out right now, and then that's enough about us. Because this is not a thing about Toronto Foundation. This is the opportunity for us to get together as a community with our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues to talk about the important issues through COVID. Today, that issue is about women and safety. And those of you that have been following the news, and I think many of us have become a bit obsessed with our Twitter feeds, are absolutely seeing some of the dire statistics. When we talk about self-isolation and staying home, sometimes home is not a safe place. And for those of us privileged enough to not be worried about that, we sometimes forget what this truly means for women. And so, but there are other issues around women, the fact that they are often the ones working on the front lines, you know, the highest percentage of nurses, the highest percentage of caregivers and PSWs. Women on all sides, as always, are the great the great intersectional issue of gender is playing out and amplified by COVID-19 as much as it is in every other aspect. This is the conversation we've been having at Toronto Foundation. When you want to have maximum impact, you have to pick the issues that have the most intersections, and gender is absolutely one of them. And you would see that whether you're talking about poverty, you're talking about violence, you're talking about indigenous and reconciliation issues, you are talking about women. And so that's why this is our theme today, and it's so important. I want to remind you, as we start talking to our awesome panel who have given an hour to us today, that there will be questions. We're only and I disappeared, and I'm back. I think we're all back. So Deepa, let's start with you, and then I'm going to turn my video and audio off so we can get maximum firepower in our wireless today. Deepa Mattoo is the executive director of the Barbra Schlifer Commemorative Clinic. And I'd like you to start by telling us what we always start with here is the before. What was Barbra Schlifer doing before COVID? And then what is your reality today?
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you so much for organizing this panel and for fantabulous conversations that you have been having in this week 4. which I think is week 4 for most of us in this new world order, as I call it sometimes. So Barbra Schlifer Clinic, for the folks who don't know about the clinic, and also for the folks who know, just to recap, we are a clinic which is named after Barbra Schlifer, and hence the name of the clinic, Barbra Schlifer Commemorative Clinic. In April of 1980, Barbra Schlifer, who was a feminist lawyer to be herself, on the unfortunate night of her call to the bar, was assaulted and murdered. Her friends and Barbra Schlifer always wanted to come together and work in social justice and be social justice lawyers, like myself. That was her dream, that she wanted to practice in law, but do social justice lawyering. In 1985, her friends came together and created the clinic. So clinic since then, till today, the only organization which does counseling services for the women who have experienced violence, as well as legal services under the one roof. We also have a small housing program. We added on interpretation services as this work started happening. The clinic realized that immigrant women and women who don't speak English cannot be served without having a proper interpretation, which is sensitive to their needs. So we added on interpretation services slightly later in our work. But right now, currently, interpretation services provides over 200 languages of interpretation live. At any given minute, you can call and get the person who needs that language in less than a minute over the phone. And we also provide face-to-face interpretation and translation services. In our legal services, which is what the clinic is known for the most, we practice family law and immigration law. And more recently, we added a component of criminal law as well, with the Criminalization of Women Project, which is funded by Law Foundation of Ontario. And through a generous donation of a private funder, we have been able to have a project on precarious employment and precarious status as well. So that's where the clinic's work is currently. Clinic does some really innovative work. We also do system change work and advocacy work. We are an ECOSOC accredited organization. So we also engage in a lot of UN advocacy for violence against women and work. Education and training is another side of the another side of the clinic that we engage in. We are a teaching clinic. We teach students under a feminist advocacy course program from Osgoode Hall Law School, as well as we take externship students from UFT Law. In terms of the changes and where we are, we tried very early on when the COVID-19 started hitting us that we will keep our doors open and try to do our business as usual, as I sometimes say, that the services will not be least impacted and we will be there till we are asked to close doors, and thankfully we were not. So we are keeping our doors open. We are also we have also modified our services. So a lot of our services are now available over the phone, online, but we are also there, keeping our doors open. For the women who come to the clinic, who do not have any way to get back to them, we have now, again, innovation. We have found ways to be in touch with them through finding phones that we can give them. So we are very happy that in the middle of all this crisis, we are coming up with small ways of being innovative and finding ways to connect with them. So that's where we are at. The services are available. The legal services are a little bit disruptive because of the system is not necessarily available. A lot of court systems are only available for urgent motions and family law context. But in the criminal law context, the challenges are very unique because we work with women who are criminalized violence survivors. So that challenge is probably, I'll talk about it more later on. And in immigration, so far, the applications are being submitted. So for in that one particular area, we're continuing to do the work as usual.
Thanks, Deepa. I guess a question I would imagine the group has is, are you seeing an increase in volume? And can you tell us, you know, as we heard a story recently that has sort of brought home the COVID crisis in terms of what women are really dealing with. Can you help us touch it a little bit more closely?
Absolutely. I think the minute I heard the message, stay home, I had a knee-jerk reaction to it. I was like, don't say that to people we work with, because unfortunately, women experience violence at home the most. Women experience violence from people they know the most. So that whole concept of stranger danger is not necessarily what women experience. So that stay home to begin with was obviously done for the right reason, but without thinking it through what the impact of that would be. A, for women who don't have a home, and B, for women who have a home but with abusive relationships. So in terms of the numbers, the week one, we saw a huge drop in numbers as compared to our usual numbers. So for the size of the clinic, we are a very high volume clinic. We receive anywhere from 30 to 50 calls a day, and we saw a huge drop. And we knew that this is happening because there was this kind of a silencing messaging that was going out: stay home, don't go out. So obviously women were also trying to orient themselves to this new world reality and this change. And since then, we are seeing a steady increase in numbers, but also a steady increase in complexities, which we haven't necessarily dealt with in past the same way. So we have non-status women who could not access services even in prior scenario, but in this new scenario, they don't have access to the very basic things like food now, because their jobs are the kind of jobs they do. They are mostly cash-oriented jobs, and they can't do those jobs in this environment. We have women who don't have any place to live, and they are couch surfing from one day to another, and those doors are now not as much open for them. So stay put is also not working for them because they didn't have a place to just be. So they are finding it really hard. My sisters who work in shelters, and Heather can speak to it later on, shelters were already really stretched for their spaces. So asking a sister who works in a shelter to say, can you work with my client and give them a space, is also not necessarily always a possibility. So in terms of the challenges that we are seeing, some of the challenges are just a continuum of what we already had a problem, but some of those things are completely new, which we are dealing with because of the COVID-19.
I think that's actually a great segue, Deepa, to Heather. Let's bring Heather up now. Heather's the CEO of the YWCA Toronto, and I'm just so happy to see you, Heather. We go back a ways and have had a great partnership with the YW for a few years now. But I can't think that anything that Deepa has said is a surprise to you in any way. I know that the YW has a really wide span of work with women, but if we could focus on shelter services to begin with, again, Heather, can you talk to me about the before and after for the YW?
Sure. So I actually want to set a bit of a context about the YWCA that has been around since 1873, so 147 years, and we've always done housing and we've always done employment, and that's what we're still doing. So on the housing side, we have a range of housing options for women, and at the moment we're running 4 shelters. 2 shelters for homeless single women and 2 shelters for women and children who are fleeing violence. And then we have about 550 units of permanent, affordable, supportive housing as well. So as Deepa suggested to you, our violence against women's shelters and our homeless shelters are always full. So before this happened, we had full shelters, and we were already turning away women who were escaping situations of violence. But now we are still full. But one of the difficulties that we have now is the social and physical distancing in our shelters. So, for instance, in our homeless shelters, at one location, We have 53 beds. That's how you count in shelters, but it's in a kind of a dormitory style, which means that the women are too close together. So if women leave, and some women have gone to stay with friends or family as they are able, we have tried not to fill those spaces. In other words, so that there is more space between women so that we can pay attention to the social distancing. And the same is true in our violence against women shelters. There's huge pressure, of course, um, to fill the spaces, but in fact, it's not safe. So that's been a big pressure for us recently.
It feels like an impossible choice, Heather, choosing between public health crisis and a physical health crisis and a mental health crisis. How do you balance the demand between also, I imagine, an increase in demand when you've got new women who are suddenly need you desperately,
Mhm.
and you have to say, well, we have 53 beds, but we can't use them because they're too close together.
Well, there's several things. We're doing a lot of work on the telephones, so providing counseling over the phone. So that's one thing. But the other thing, particularly in our homeless shelters, the city has been helping us try to find hotels that will take uh, women into the hotels, which would mean that we would have fewer in our shelter. But what, of course, it's meant is that we've actually identified a hotel and are able to afford rooms in hotel for about 3 months through a generous donation from a donor who is supporting that. But as well, the city uh, has found another hotel that we're going to look at. In fact, just this afternoon, to see, it's a hotel with 50 rooms, to see whether we can move people there, because they will be single rooms, and obviously that will be better. But we also have other programs that support women who are in violent situations. So, for instance, we have a program for child witnesses of violence and their mothers, and we're in contact with those women over the phone. We also have a December 6th fund, which provides loans to women to leave situations of violence, and we're trying to keep in touch with people through that program as well. But it's difficult, and of course, one of the things is that it's challenging continuing to staff these essential services, because of course our staff are worried about the real risk of getting the virus. And of course, there are multiple messages to our staff. One is for us to say, we have essential services and please come and work in our essential services. But every medical person is saying, stay home. So it's a difficult thing to deal with for community agencies that are trying to provide essential services such as shelters.
We've talked a lot about that on this gathering, about the bravery of some of our staff, but
Mm-hmm.
also our how exhausted they're getting, being on the front lines, often at their own health risks, but also this, of course, the sort of the juggle they're likely doing at home as well. And we were talking about that before we came into the room, weren't we? And how, as leaders, we need to be balanced in the way we talk to staff. What are you seeing? Are you seeing like? Can you give me a story, Heather, about some of the staff that are really surprising you in their reaction? Yeah.
Yes. So our essential staff are in the shelters and in our permanent housing and in our property services department. And I must say the commitment on the part of the property services staff to come in and make sure that our facilities are clean and safe and everything is really remarkable. But But let me tell you something else about how the community has reached out to us as well, in a recognition of the work that our essential workers are providing. So just the other day, Shoppers Drug Mart and Loblaws sent us 70 bouquets of flowers for our staff, which is, it's very heartwarming, and our staff really appreciate that. And so our shelters have been filled with flowers, which is really a lovely thing in a time when certainly I try to project an air of calm as a leader, and try to prove and try to see the glass, half full rather than half empty. But sometimes it's challenging. But but the community reaching out and doing things like sending flowers is great. I guess the other thing is that in our shelters, particularly our violence against women shelters, we're very, very stretched on the food, the cooking side, and what would really be wonderful is if sometimes one of the takeout restaurants or other people could provide meals for the shelter, so that it's a real break, for our staff and for the women and the children who live in the shelter. So those are some of the really down to earth things that make a difference in an environment that is so tough.
Thank you, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move now to Pamela Hart, who is the Executive Director of the Native Women's Resource Center. Welcome, Pamela. And thank you for joining us this morning. Don't forget to turn your mic on, Pamela. So like everyone else, give us the before and after of Native Women's Resource Center.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me join this important discussion. For those who don't know about Native Women's, we are one of two Indigenous women-specific agencies in the city. The other agency is residential and housing specific, and so we actually are the only Indigenous women's service agency offering a variety of programs and meeting the needs of Indigenous women. So before COVID-19, we were active and busy and serving hot meals, providing showers, laundry, emergency services, meeting the basic needs of women of the community. But we were also doing cultural enhanced programming and offering ceremony and upgrading and offering things that are building confidence and capacity within the women and the families that we serve. So today we are doing the same, it just looks very different. So where we had anywhere from 10 to 60 women come through the agency in one day, we're now doing that remotely and virtually, much like this platform we're using today. We're using telephones, we're using online platforms to promote wellness while at home. We're doing distant programming and posting videos for women to interact and do while they're confined to their homes. We're trying to provide activities that they can do with their children or that children can do alone so mothers can have a bit of a break. We are in the process of creating a portal so we can house all of our program and resources in one very user-friendly, safe place for our clients to go and access all the old and new upcoming programming that's going to occur. I think sometimes on social media and our website, things can get lost, and we wanted to create something where individuals could go at any time and that it felt very specific and special to the unfortunate circumstances that we're sort of all in.
Pamela, what are you hearing from women the issues you were dealing with were complex and multi-generational. What layer has COVID added to what you're hearing from women that you're serving?
So I think, on any given day, Indigenous women walk around in their lives feeling fearful about their existence. They have a significant awareness of their surroundings and their placement in the world and in the city. And I think that isolation is an unfortunate common thread sometimes in our community for various reasons. And now all of that is further impacted by the isolation that has been set across the city. And so as we very quickly had to transform into adjusting our programs and services, it weighed very heavy on me, the idea of an already very isolated portion of the community, those who are maybe living in hotels with individuals controlling them, or who live in households that are unhealthy, or are in relationships that face substance abuse. And now, as we've heard, that those struggling with those issues are probably struggling even more during this time. So these individuals are sometimes hard to reach in good settings, and now the fear of not having access to this portion of the community has very much increased for us. And so what we've chosen to do as a result is create a emergency hotline. So we're in the process of developing this so that there are outlets for women, if they can and when they want to, dial a number from an agency that they're familiar with and speak about what is happening for them, or possibly escape what is going on. And so we're working to implement that, and hopefully we will have units lined up where women, if they are fleeing, will have a safe place to go, but also it will be used to access our traditional healers. And so if women are in need of some spiritual sort of guidance and traditional ceremonial conversations, that we can make that direct link.
I think this is a great opportunity for me to highlight for those in the room a couple of things I've heard from our speakers that are worth reinforcing. One of them that we hear over and over again, we're always trying to convince donors to give money to a wider variety of organizations and to look at the small, medium-sized organizations doing the heavy lifting on the messiest problems we face as a society. And I think that a lot of time what I hear is, well, I've never heard of them. How can I trust their work? But what we've heard over and over again through the years, and even more during COVID, is how on a shoestring organizations are adapting and moving their programming in incredibly fast and creative ways under the circumstances, and how resilient these orgs can be because they're just used to living in a environment of constant change. And so to hear you like reworking your programming to add a hotline, is a great example of that. And the other thing I wanted to highlight was just how long these organizations have been around. I didn't say it at the time, Heather, but 18, 120, 130, 150 plus year organizations that have been doing great work. I guess my last question for you, Pamela, because I think it's always important, and you just started touching on it when you talked about making access to healers, is the richness of the Indigenous culture and how that comes into practice for you, and how do you do that using technology in a community that is, prefers to sit face to face in circles and in relationship. What does that look like today?
So we are very fortunate to have two female Indigenous healers, and with them and the agency, we take the approach of protocol flexibility, and we recognize that we are a urban Indigenous group of women and agency, and therefore they've been very accommodating in bending the traditional concepts of how we do circles and ceremony. So they have actually been out of town up north, and they have been working remotely via telephone to provide one-on-ones. They've also done a number of ceremonies thus far where we have invited people to do their own ceremonies by themselves wherever they are, because we know that ceremony can take place wherever you need it to take place, and that your prayers and your ancestors are always with you. But to take that to the next level, we've gained the platforms to provide interactive ceremonies, and so this evening there will be an online full moon ceremony, and our healer from where she is in her territory is going to be facilitating that, and people have registered online to attend, very much like this platform. We're mindful of not sharing the faces of all the participants to be confidential, but we do want to be able to provide those ceremonies to everyone during this time, because now more than ever is when these ceremonies are going to make large impacts and when people need them the most. And I think that I have seen a really deep strengthening of our culture among our community. It's been very humbling and eye-opening to be reminded of how significant our ceremonies and our traditions are to the strength of who we are as Indigenous women and as a community as a whole.
They bring comfort and grounding, right? As we head into Passover and Easter weekend, we're seeing that in all cultures, that I think what's it's the hardest time not to be together, and yet the most important time to practice what brings spiritual meaning to us. And I think that's beautiful. And a weirdly beautiful part of what's going on here. I think everyone's reminded of what's most important in their lives, and hopefully that brings some comfort. I'm going to bring us all back on the screen together so we can have a group conversation, and I have some questions from the chat room. So I'm going to start with Deepa. Can you tell us a short story about one of your clients and a unique challenge that she might be facing right now? And don't forget to put your mic back on, Deepa.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you for asking that, because as I was thinking about our conversation this morning, I was thinking, okay, which story should I pick? Because there's every day when we meet with our high-risk team, so we do daily meetings these days, and we talk about what we're struggling with in these new circumstances, but we also talk about where are we headed and what are we actually being successful with. All of you probably know that because of the COVID-19, a lot of inmates in the jail are being released. And that's causing a very unique and a very high-risk situation for women whose abusers were incarcerated. And for the journey of that woman and this person means that there was an accountability set up, and she was feeling a bit more safer, knowing that her abuser is not around. And suddenly, when these abusers are back in the community and threatening them seriously, we are faced with a very unique challenge of how do we do safety planning. In some cases, we don't even know, but in this one particular case, the high-risk case manager at the clinic was contacted by the woman because the guy came out, and within the days of being out, he started threatening her all over again. And the high-need case manager, with the support of a police officer, were able to get him back arrested. And I know that from the perspective of working with the enforcement system, where I also work with highly marginalized clients, where I know that enforcement and cops are not necessarily always the answer. But a woman who's facing danger for her life and children, this was one story which we felt that we had someone who we could work with. There was a lot of remote coordination that was required. So having a technology where we could talk to like 3 or 4 different people at the same time. So we felt that we had done something right in terms of where we had gone with our resources. We are very small organization, but we were able to move all 45 staff to an online platform within 2 days. So for us, that is a huge success, knowing that all of that played a huge role in getting this unique service to this woman.
Thank you for that. Heather, I have an interesting question that I think you could help us take apart, which is the challenging question of alcohol abuse at this time, and the fact that it's remained, LCBOs have remained open. And the question from the audience is, does it make sense to limit alcohol at this time? Would that be a way to reduce domestic abuse?
Whoa, that's a very tough question. And I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that one. So there are various sides of it. People who are addicts who would have access to alcohol restricted would have their own difficulties, and certainly we work with women who are dependent upon alcohol. What I think is kind of interesting about that whole issue about keeping the LCBO and the beer stores open is that it's a recognition of addiction, that in fact closing the stores would create another problem. Now, of course, the whole issue of violence and alcohol, which I think is very well documented, and I don't think we have to spend much time talking about that. But I actually think that in the long run, it may provoke some very interesting conversations about the recognition of addictions as a very serious problem. And I don't know whether people know this, but that in but in our greater GTA community, there is one rehab center for women only, with 30 beds in the entire community. So it's a huge issue that I'm not sure that I'm answering the question exactly, but there are all kinds of ways that you could go in thinking about the whole issue of alcohol.
Well, and I would just suggest that what you've done is help us ask a whole lot more questions. We haven't gone into addiction as a conversation yet, but that may be a future theme for us to explore, Heather. I'm really glad you pointed that out. Okay, Pamela, I have a question about your hotline, and a theme that's come up in our last few webinars has been around vulnerable populations and lack of access to technology. And so, and after you answer, Pamela, if anyone else wants to add any thoughts from your communities, but we realized that we had the team from the Massey Center on last week, and Akua was talking about the fact that she has so many young pregnant mothers who don't have cell phones. So how does one access, when technology has become the standard way we connect with each other, what if you don't have access to technology, and what does that look like? So Pamela, I'll ask you to answer that first, but I'll invite Deepa or Heather to also comment after.
So we definitely considered that as we started the preliminary planning of the hotline. And so we're looking at several different options around the telephone line specifically. We also are looking to purchase phones, phone cards, minutes, etc., to try and get out into the community. I also am in conversations with the Aboriginal Peacekeeping Unit, the Monica Rutledge, so that we can talk about other alternative and innovative measures to put in place in the community for those who maybe don't have cell phones. So there are examples that have been used in other cities and areas of the world where there are code words used when you go into a place of essential service, so whether that's a grocery store or pharmacy, somewhere public where there are people, and you can implement something through those agencies and essential services to have a code word where the police are then contacted. And so that's why I'm in conversations with the APU. We're still in very early conversations, but we do recognize that telephones or access to them are either not available or heavily monitored. And so we are exploring all of those barriers to ensure that we do try and get this information out and reach everyone that we possibly can.
Heather, Deepa?
Well, the thing that I think about is we have a childcare which is now closed, but I imagine that many of the parents of our children, and we're 100% subsidized childcare, wouldn't have access to laptops, and so it would be so wonderful to be able to have our staff reach out to provide some programming via laptops or telephones, so that would be a huge advantage in this new digital world. I have to say that I feel as if I'm spending my day on Zoom in meetings, something that I have never done before. But clearly, this will probably continue after this is over.
Can I
Deepa?
add? Yeah.
Please.
So just to add to that, so a couple of things that we did, we don't have a toll-free number, but we do have a conference call line, which has a toll-free number. So we came up with the innovation of using that conference line, giving that out to women so that they could call us in and we could get into the conference line and talk to her. We also started taking collect calls right in the first week. And we also were able to get donation of 40 cell phones, which we are able to hand out to a woman who says that she doesn't have any way to get in touch with her, or she doesn't have a safe phone. So the phones we just have acquired them. We haven't started giving them out, but the fact that within the third week we had confirmation that we have 40 cell phones to give out was a huge success for us. We do need USB. We don't need USB sticks. Sorry, I keep on confusing the USB stick with the internet stick. We do need internet sticks, not USB sticks. So we are still seeking donations for that, and laptops, as just put out by Heather. But I want to also put something on the table for people to think about, that sometimes using technology or using the cell phone is also not an option for a woman. So think about this, that a woman has her kids with her right now, and now she needs to talk to the counselor or a lawyer. How did she do it when her children are around her? So when she comes to the clinic physically, we have a room dedicated for our children. There's a person who works with them as a child, take care of, and plays with her with the children while the woman is in the session. I don't like the word child mining. That's why I'm trying to figure out how to say it without calling it child mining. But yeah, so the playroom with the kids. Now, how does she do that when she has kids around? How does she talk to someone? Even on the phone, how do you do it? So what we were thinking about doing in coming weeks is adjusting our service hours so that, and that might work for some of our workers who have children at home. So adjusting the hours, say early in the morning, if it works for women who give service, as well as so matching people with people who can then give out services, not in typical 9 to 5 fashion, but at different times of the day, which works for both of them. So that's something that we started having conversations about now, and that's where we would be headed. But technology is great. I'm thankful, very, very thankful for the move that we did recently. But to be honest with you, technology has its unique challenges. We all know about the Zoom bombing that's happening, and people are struggling with that. So yeah, I think coming weeks are going to be a lot of other challenges that will arise with technology as well.
Thank you, Deepa. And I love that idea of adjusting the hours of service. It's interesting how many mothers have come on this webinar and had said, my children are still sleeping. I'm so glad you did this at 8 in the morning because I won't be interrupted. You mentioned, Deepa, turbo hubs and technology as gifts. Everyone who is in the room knows that I'm encouraging people to give to all of your organizations financially. I think a flexible, undesignated No strings attached gift at this time is probably the very best way to support you. But we always have a lot of younger philanthropists on our calls who are also interested in other ways they could support you. So Deepa, you mentioned a few. Heather and Pamela, I invite you to give us other suggestions about ways people can be of service to you right now.
Well, I think I actually think about food and I think about we have a substantial number of elderly women in our permanent housing who are being told by people, by medical experts, not to leave their apartments. So shopping is difficult, to say nothing of the situation of poverty. So organizing drop-offs of food is certainly one practical way that people can do it. We actually have some volunteers who, for a number of years, every month make a large cake that they deliver to our shelters, and then once a month we have a celebration of people's birthdays or other celebratory events, and it's not even so much as eating the cake as the recognition of the celebration. So that's one thing that I could suggest.
Yeah, I think, like already mentioned, a lot of us are in the same situation, trying to adjust and adapt to the circumstances. And we've been doing enhanced food hampers that last about 2 weeks. And we're giving out gift cards and reusable face masks. And we're also looking to give out cell phones and fire sticks and things like that, so people can stay connected, because they think that that's also sort of a basic human right, is to have access to information, and have affordable Wi-Fi so that you can connect with people and that you have safety throughout. And so I think that that's, a unique way that people can contribute, is if they have access or connections to people who can connect with charities who offer affordable rates or actual devices, organize delivery of food hampers and gift cards. It comes down to capacity for agencies, and with limited staff on site, the ongoing providing of food security is very time consuming, as well as it is very demanding. But it's a necessary element. We have a number of elders in the city, and for our community, our elders are sacred, and we don't want them to leave their homes to go shopping. And so, what are some ways that we can go shopping for them and bring it to their house and make sure that we're safe when we're entering into their homes, and that PPE is available to everyone, because we all are in shortage of that as well, as we maneuver trying to offer individuals what they truly need, what are basic needs.
So I know, Pamela, your sound is a little choppy, so I'll repeat a few of those things just to make sure everyone heard it. Access to wireless, access to technology, food hampers, and delivery of food to vulnerable elders, I think is all relevant. So last week we tried something a bit interactive, and I'm going to do two things here. One is I'd like, because this whole conversation is about women and safety and resilience of women, I was hoping that those in the room might take a moment to think to themselves, when you think about resilient um, women of character, women that have inspired you, who do you think of? And if you can just think of them right now while we're just getting into the home stretch of this conversation for a moment, and why, whether they are still with us or are no longer with us. I know I go to my mom right away. I lost her 10 years ago. And think about that woman. And if you are comfortable, I'd love to see in the chat, you just call out and do a shout out to the women in your lives or in the public realm that inspire you. Because this is our shout out section of our conversation. And so I always like to do something that allows the room to shout out. So shout out the women, shout out women's organizations you support and you want to shout out to, those of you in the room. And then finally, I want our three guests to do a shout out to the organizations other than themselves that they think you should be supporting. And so I'm going to start with Heather on this one, and then go to Deepa and then Pamela on who else should people be paying attention to that is out there working hard for women right now.
Well, I was prepared for this question because Sharon said she would be asking it. And, you know, I actually can't think of anything better than my two colleagues here on the panel as people that organizations that you support, because they have wonderful on the ground services that are really, really worthy of your support. I know the Barbra Schlifer Clinic the best, but Pamela, your organization is wonderful as well. I guess the other thing is the support of food banks, I think is important.
Deepa?
I would say something similar. I think the panel here and people on the panel are probably the ones I know the best right now, and I would say them. But another organization which was one of your panelists for your last session, Sistering, I have a lot of respect for their work, and I know that how hard they are working to keep their services available at this point. So definitely a shout out to Sistering.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I'll just say for anyone who wasn't with us last week, the recording of that is available if you want to hear more about Sistering's work on our foundation YouTube channel. Pamela, who would you shout out to?
So I'm going to shout out three, if that's okay. One to my fellow panelists, because this morning I've learned so much about your organizations, and often, you know, working in the community so passionately, we forget that there are other agencies in the mainstream sector who are doing this incredible work for the rest of the women who need strong women leaders, and to create safe spaces for them. Because as I think I've heard and all can agree, is there is a lack of support and agencies and services for women across the city. And so the work that both of your agencies are doing are amazing. I would also like to mention Thunder Women Healing Lodge Society, because as Deepa mentioned, women are being released from jails. And
Pamela, I'm going to interrupt you. I hate interrupting, but the name got garbled, and I think it's really important they hear the name. So say it slowly and clearly.
Thunder Women Healing Lodge. Women Healing Lodge. Which is for women in conflict with the law. And so as they are being let out of the jails right now with no place to go, we're actually creating higher risk for these Indigenous women. And then because in the true spirit of balance, which is key to Indigenous culture, I would mention probably Native and residents who serve Indigenous homeless men. And so they are often an overlooked population. We believe in balance of, you know, gender and equality and our roles within our community. And so I think, you know, it's important to remember that contributing to homeless men isn't the most trendy, attractive thing to contribute to. So I would also give a shout out to them for the hard work they're doing in this difficult time.
You know, it would only be on an all-woman panel talking about women that we would see so much solidarity and boosting of each other. And that is what makes, well, that's what gives me hope in these times, but it also is why I love working with women-led organizations on women's issues. And I thank you, all three of you, for giving us your time today and being a part of it. If you just look through the chat, I'm seeing some wonderful devotions to women, including Heather. I saw one to you as a woman of choice. And I don't think this person works for you. So I think that's wonderful. I think that's just beautiful and inspiring. I'm also seeing lots of shout outs to other women's organizations, all of which we will be summing up and making sure everyone who's here in the room has access to after this call. because we really think this conversation needs to continue. I think we're going to see women continuing to be disproportionately affected by this crisis, and it's really important topic to keep alive and keep discussing. So I want to thank you, Pamela, Deepa, and Heather, for taking time today, and ask those on the in the room and on the call to use this as an inspiration to act. I said off the top, we do have some matching money available over this weekend. If you visit the Toronto Foundation website and go on Ways to Give on the coalition page and scroll down to pooling your donations, there is a place there for you to donate. We don't typically fundraise on this webinar, but because it's doubling money, we wanted to make sure it was available to everyone who has been with us over the last few weeks, as well as to our fund holders. And so we have $190,000 available to match your work and your donations. And so please do that over the weekend. It is 9 o'clock, friends, and it is time to wrap up. We'll leave the chat open for a few minutes afterwards. We find there's a lot of interaction that continues after we hang up, but I will say my official goodbyes. And as always, wish everyone with us well, stay healthy. I wish you to be connected to your loved ones, whatever shape or your family takes. And as we head into a highly spiritual weekend, if that's your belief system, I wish you a connection to that belief and that spirituality that brings you some comfort at this difficult time. Next week, we will be talking about the issues of race, another big intersection to COVID, and I hope you will all consider joining us. Thank you all very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.